Peace is possible because people don't really have a choice at this point. I think the most important thing to remember is that we are architects of our own future, architects of our own reality, and we can create the future and the reality that we want for ourselves, but we have to focus on it and we have to see it. We have to be able to see it to manifest it.
My name is May and Siddeeqah. I am half American, half Palestinian, born and raised in Saudi Arabia. So very mixed. Even ancestrally, we have Anglo-Saxon background, we have African background, Middle Eastern background, and that is actually how I identify personally. I see myself as half Palestinian, half American. I have a son, he's 9 years old, his name is Yahya. He's even more mixed than I am because he's also part Lebanese.
Hi, my name is Siddeeqah Sharif Fichman. I am a Afro-Indigenous American Muslim. I was compelled to do peace talks because I'm raising children who are half Israeli, and I would like them to live in a world where they don't have to choose between peace and violence.
Peace is possible. That despite both sides, having people who have extreme views, on one side or the other, and despite people in the US who don't even have necessarily a connection to the land or to that part of the world, still having very strong opinions, that we do believe peace is possible. And I want to raise him with that mentality and that outlook on life, that we're all different, but that is beautiful and that is actually a good thing. And if anybody can prove that to the world, I believe, it's families like ours and children like ours who are mixed and do come from two completely, polar opposite parts of the world, not just in terms of location, but even in terms of, geopolitics and alliances and all of that. And I want him to be able to know how to address this topic as he gets older, and be able to explain to people that we do want peace, and that we do believe that that is possible, and that is something we're willing to fight for by educating people, one person at a time.
I think for me it's important to understand the humanity of both sides of the conflict. Like, understanding Israelis helped me to understand where they were even coming from, because I had no frame of reference, or I had no empathy, honestly, initially for their position, because for me, as a person who is Afro-Indigenous, having seen colonialism decimate my people, I could only see them as colonialists and not as human beings. And I think growing up with Palestinians, and knowing intimately, having a vision of them as human beings already humanized them in a way that did not that I didn't have for Israelis. But marrying an Israeli and having conversations with him and learning, going to Passover with friends and hearing their stories, and just understanding this idea, because I never even understood the idea of a connection to that part of the world. But understanding the idea of the connection allowed me to, at least, even if I don't agree with it, understand where it came from. And I think it's important to see human beings as human beings. Even IDF soldiers and Hamas warriors, they're human beings and they're struggling for a reason, whether it's the reason that we want or we agree with or not.
So to me, the peace talk, it really came up because in the beginning, I tried to shelter my son from what was happening. He's so young and they're so impressionable at this age. And my thought was, let them enjoy the innocence of childhood before they, are forced to grow up and realize, all of the biases that exist and all of the atrocities that take place. However, with what's going on in Gaza right now, there's a lot of information coming through on the news, conversations that come up even, in our household when talking, when adults are talking to each other. And so he actually asked me at one point, he's like, are we from Palestine, and why is there war there? And why would people want to hurt us? And that's when I realized that we really needed to have the peace talk.
I think my advice to mothers is to stand in power and not in fear. There are a lot of mothers who are afraid that, what happened on both sides, like all over the world, actually afraid for their children. And so we give them advice based on that fear instead of giving them advice based on what we want for them and what we want to see rather than what we don't want to see. And holding a vision of that when you're having those peace talks, actually seeing it manifested in your mind first and in your heart, and feeding that seed instead of feeding the other seed of fear and anger and resentment.
What it means for us, what it has meant for our family, that his grandfather became a refugee when he was only 3 years old, that he lived in the refugee camps when they were literally just tents, that our family has spent the past 75 years with the key to our house still in our safe. Because Palestinians always believed, in the right of return, and that one day our family would make it back home.
I think peace talks are important because people need to remember, we all need to remember that we're susceptible to influences, we're susceptible to manipulation, and our lower selves, our like most base selves are fearful and are afraid. I've always had to balance or navigate the different cultures and the different identities that would live within me.
So it's like it's not dogmatic. Okay. Spiritual stuff, like everyone feels comfortable.
Suffering is not the only inheritance that you have. Like, you are children of survivors, and I think that's an important part of their legacy. And I think that is also something that should tie people together in this situation. When I think about the civil rights movement and what my people had to teach their children, there was an active movement to teach the children how to respond, how to answer questions, how to hold themselves in check because people would try to provoke them. But understand that this was a nonviolent movement, that this was a movement towards peace. And actually, it wasn't towards peace back then, it was towards justice, economic justice. But this was a movement, and any violence, anything that could deter or could harm the cause would not be allowed, and to kind of check yourselves. And my grandmother used to tell me, I mean, she told my children, her great grandchildren, about, protesting and having sit-ins in a place where she worked, but she could not eat. There's a shared legacy of expulsion, and a shared legacy of oppression, and a shared legacy of being victims of state-sanctioned violence. And I think that there's also this shared need of each other's liberation. And I think that without one, you can't have the other. And that's why this is so important, because we've reached, a tipping point where people are realizing that you cannot have Israeli safety without Palestinian freedom, and you can't have Palestinian freedom without Israeli safety. And I think that that's across the board all over the world. Like, until all of us are free, none of us are free.
They have so many and it's unfortunate, but they have so many examples in real life around them of people like you and like your family who have experienced it and have triumphed and have found the way to be the bigger and the better person, and to talk about peace, and to even marry somebody outside of, you know, your faith and your background and even your political views. And so to me, you are a living example of what we're trying to teach our children. And I will carry that with me, and I want my son to get to know you and your children better, because I think they do have shared experiences, and that they can learn from each other, you know, and help each other thrive.
I tell my children that they are children of survivors. Like, they have come from people who have been systematically oppressed all over the world. That they have a grandfather or a great-grandfather who was in the Holocaust, and they have great-grandparents on my side who or great-great-grandparents, ancestry that like walked through the Trail of Tears, and they have, you know, European ancestry. So they really, I try to let them know that you are not a people that suffering is not the only inheritance that you have. Like, you are children of survivors, and I think that's an important part of their legacy. And I think that is also something that should tie people together in this situation. Having those talks is the same kind of talk, you know, that we have to achieve. It matters how we achieve our end goal, and I want them to be beacons of light. And in doing that, you have to discipline yourself to have those difficult conversations without allowing yourself to be moved by provocation. And it's difficult. I have that difficulty myself, and it's a huge challenge not to allow yourself to be provoked. And sometimes we win those battles, sometimes we lose, but it's important for them to even know that that is a part of the battle. Getting rid of that fear, dealing with that fear, confronting that fear, because that fear is based in trauma, and a trauma that has been transferred from one people to another, because it wasn't something that they ever had to fear in that region before. Like, they didn't have to fear that now from Palestinians. It doesn't matter. Like, they're human, and they have a reason of something that pushed them forward, something that they believe in that pushed them forward, and understanding that is key to even having a conversation that could get them to understand each other.
My father, so I was trying to tell my son that his grandfather, who was a refugee and was only a child in 1948 and had to experience this and, you know, live through the refugee camp, still raised us always saying hate is a strong word. We don't use it. And as a kid, I didn't understand the significance of that. But, you know, when you get older, you look back and realize, for that to come from someone who experienced the violence firsthand, kind of like your great-grandmother, having her own co-workers, you know, mistreat her or throw coffee on her and still say, I'm gonna be bigger than this, I'm gonna be better than that. It's not easy. And so I'm still struggling personally with how to convey that and the nuances to a child, while also trying to make sure that he learns to hold his head up high and to still be proud of it. So